Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if computers can really understand our emotions and opinions, especially when we're talking about big issues like climate change? Well, this new study dives right into that question. Imagine you are scrolling through news articles or comments online about something as important as climate activism. You see people expressing their views, sometimes strongly, sometimes with anger. How can we possibly keep up with and understand all those opinions? Especially when they're in a language like German. This paper explores exactly that, comparing some super smart computer programs to our own human judgment. So, what is the big idea here? Researchers wanted to see how well a fancy computer program called GPT could figure out two things in German text about climate activism. First, what is the writer's stance? Are they for it, against it, or somewhere in the middle? Second, are they expressing anger? They compared this to older, but still popular computer methods like BERT and a tool called LIWC. And guess what? The newer GPT models, especially GPT-4 Turbo, did a surprisingly good job, often better than the other methods, and even sometimes better than individual human helpers. Now, why is this even important? We live in a world flooded with text data from social media and news. Understanding what people think and feel about big topics is key to understanding society. For a long time, scientists have used language to understand psychology. But with so much text, doing it by hand is impossible. That is where computer programs or natural language processing or NLP come in. They're like super fast readers that can help us make sense of all that information. One of the cool things computers can do is called stance detection. It is not just about whether someone is happy or sad, but about their overall opinion, their position on an issue. Like if someone says, we need to act on climate change now, that is not just a positive sentiment. Their stance is strongly in favor of climate action. This is super useful for understanding debates. Traditionally, computers learn like this. They'd be trained on huge amounts of text, like with a program called BERT, which is really good at understanding how words relate to each other in sentences. But for a specific task, like detecting stances, BERT usually needs more training, like learning from specific examples. The problem is these examples are often very specific to one topic and don't work well in other situations. It is like teaching a kid to recognize cats, and then they can't recognize dogs because they've only seen cats. Then there are simpler methods, like using a special dictionary. For example, the LIWC tool counts words that show certain emotions, like anger. It is like having a checklist of angry words. But this can be tricky. It might miss the context of a sentence. For instance, saying this is a damn good movie uses a strong word, but it is positive, not angry. And that brings us to the newer kids on the block, large language models or LLMs. Think of GPT 3.5 and GPT-4 Turbo as super advanced versions of these. They've been trained on an unbelievable amount of text and can understand language in a very sophisticated way, often without needing tons of extra specific training. This study wanted to see if these LLMs could actually do a good job with German texts about climate activism, which is a complex and often emotional topic. So, how did they actually test this? Imagine you want to understand what people are saying about climate protests in Germany. The researchers collected a massive pile of news articles and comments from 8 different German news outlets. They wanted to make sure they got a good range of opinions. They then picked out a smaller but still significant chunk of these articles and comments to really dig into. For this smaller sample, they had 3 human experts read each text. These experts were asked to rate 2 main things for each text. First, what was the stance on Fridays for future? A major climate activist group. Was it strongly in favor? Slightly in favor? Neutral, slightly against, or strongly against? Second, they rated how much anger was expressed in the text. They used a scale from no anger to high anger. This is important because anger can be a powerful motivator for people to take action. By having multiple human raters, they could check how well humans agreed with each other, which is a baseline to compare the computer models against. Then came the computer part. They gave the same text to GPT 3.5 and GPT-4 Turbo and asked them to act like the human raters, giving their opinion on stance and anger. They also tested 2 BERT models that were already trained for stance detection in German and the LIWC tool for anger. They were careful with how they instructed the GPT models, making sure they understood the task and the scale to use. They used 2 different BERT models that were trained on different German datasets. One dataset, X stance, had comments from politicians, while the other, cheese, had news articles. This gave them a good comparison point for the BERT models. After the humans and computers made their ratings, the researchers compared them. They checked how much the computer model's answers matched the majority answer given by the human raters. They used fancy statistical tools to measure disagreement, making sure the results weren't just due to chance. Think of it like this. If you and your friend both agree that the movie was great, that is good agreement. If you and two other friends all agreed, that is even better. The researchers wanted to see if the computer models agreed with the group consensus of the human raters. Okay, so what did they find? The first key finding was that the human raters actually agreed with each other quite a bit. This is good news because it means the task itself was fairly clear and their human ratings are reliable. They then compared the computer models to this human majority vote. And here is where it gets really interesting. For stance detection, the GPT models, especially GPT-4 Turbo, did really well. They were often better than the two BERT models they tested. These BERT models, even though they were trained for stance detection, really struggled when it came to these German news articles and comments. It looks like the specific training data they used for BERT didn't transfer well to this new type of text. Even more remarkably, the GPT model sometimes agreed with the human majority vote more than individual human raters agreed with each other. That is a strong sign that GPT is a pretty good judge of stance. There was a slight hiccup with GPT 3.5. It had a bit of trouble figuring out which comments were completely unrelated to the climate activism topic. But overall, both GPT versions were strong contenders. Now, what about anger? Here too, the GPT model shone. They were much better at identifying anger than the traditional Luke dictionary approach. Luke, by just counting words, often missed the nuances of how anger was expressed in the text. Again, the GPT model's agreement with the human majority vote was strong, and in many cases better than the agreement between human raters themselves. This suggests that GPT is not only understanding the stance, but also the emotional tone of the text. One small but interesting finding was that GPT models tended to rate texts as angrier than the human raters did. This could be because the topic of climate activism naturally brings strong emotions, or it might be a slight tendency for GPT to overemphasize anger. The researchers noted that this is something to keep in mind for future studies. So, what does all this mean? The study really highlights how powerful these new large language models like GPT can be for analyzing text. They're showing that they can capture nuanced human opinions and emotions in a language like German, which is a big step forward. The fact that GPT matched human judgment so well, and in some cases even surpassed it, is a game changer. For researchers who don't have the time or money to manually label thousands of texts, GPT offers a much more efficient and cost-effective solution. It is like having a team of super-fast, highly consistent annotators at your fingertips. The older BERT models, which were trained on specific datasets, really showed their limitations here. Their inability to generalize to this new set of German texts suggests that if you are working with data that is different from what is out there in typical training datasets, these older models might not be the best choice. Building new training datasets is a huge task. So having LLMs that can work out of the box is a major advantage. And when it comes to anger, GPT clearly beats the dictionary-based Luke method. This shows the importance of context. Luke just counts words, but GPT understands how those words are used within a sentence and a broader topic. It's not just about the presence of an angry word, but how it contributes to the overall message. In conclusion, this study provides strong evidence that GPT models are powerful tools for understanding human attitudes and emotions in text, even in languages other than English and for complex topics like climate activism. They seem to be more reliable and efficient than older NLP methods when dealing with diverse, real-world texts. This is fantastic news for anyone wanting to do research in fields like psychology, sociology, or political science. You don't need to be an NLP expert or have a massive budget to get valuable insights from text data. These LLMs can help you explore public opinion, track sentiment shifts, and understand how people express their feelings on important issues. The future of research using text data looks brighter than ever. While there is always room for improvement, like fine-tuning these models for even greater accuracy or understanding those subtle biases, the core finding is clear. LLMs are a revolution in how we can understand human language, and by extension, human minds. What do you all think? Can you imagine using tools like GPT for your own research, or even just to understand online discussions better? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science insights, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.